I'm your host, Greg Fenton. Each week, we explore topics and ideas related to the experience of people with conflict and look to promote the profession of conflict resolvers. We are available to connect with at fentonmediation@gmail.com and at 647-227-4734. Visit us at our Facebook page and our Facebook group to become a member. You can also check out YouTube channel, Fenton Mediation, to see videos of past shows and this show when it's uploaded eventually. Listen to podcasts of Mediation Station on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Please follow us at our Twitter account at Fenton Mediation. The conversation today is called Conflict and Change. What's the difference? With me will be Pramila Javaheri very soon. So my usual stuff, presenting about the dynamics. The program continues live each Sunday from 8 to 9 p.m. through Zoom instead of being at the radio station. We will engage in conversation with everyone attending, able to listen and watch the conversation. Microphones and webcams will be closed, and if anyone wants to contribute anything, there are two options. One is to see the chat icon as a bubble at the bottom center of your screen for you to click to then type in a comment or question and click to send. Or you can click on the reactions icon that is also located on the bottom center of your screen. For us to see, you click on the hand icon and that'll open up to show your hand. We'll then know to open up your mic only, not your camera. You can speak to share your comment and question. And then we'll close your mic again, and then we'll incorporate your comment or question into our conversation. The show is being recorded for both video and audio purposes that will be uploaded for public access on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts to listen to once the show is edited, usually sometime later in the week. So today, conflict and change. What's the difference? With me is my friend, my colleague, Pramila. Pramila, how you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm okay too. I'm all right. Appreciate you dropping in, sort of.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So let's start off. Let's get right into the crux of it. What is one thing that people don't know about you that I want to know about you? Share that, please.
Let people. Well, I think something that lots of people don't know about me is that one time when I was in BC training with Canada Post, the class thought it would be a good idea to climb the grouse grind. And I knew nothing about the grouse grind at the time. So I was like, sure, this sounds like a really great adventure. And so when we got there, it said, beware, there have been bear sightings. And so, of course, I thought to myself, well, as long as I can outrun the slowest person, I should be okay. And so lots of people don't know that I can be quite adventurous at times. And so I had a lot of fun. It was definitely a workout. And lots of people don't know I play the accordion.
The accordion?
Yeah.
Do you have one handy? You want to?
Well, I had one, but I don't think I'm going to crack it out. Opened it yet.
So just to get back to the first unknown about you, were there any bears?
I didn't see any bears, thankfully.
You had your runners on in case?
Yeah. I was not in my professional training gear. I was in my gym gear.
All right. Thank you for sharing. So in terms of your work as a professional, what do you see as being important in doing that work?
Well, I've been doing my work for about 21 years now, and I'm really passionate about peace building. And I think what's really important about it is just the ability to support others in peace building and in conflict resolution and just resolving issues from day to day, whether that be very minor conflicts that come up but are very real to other people, or really large conflicts around the city of Toronto, across Canada. And so I definitely find that that's really important to me, and I'm really passionate about it. And it's really important that folks that want to be peace building or community building have that opportunity to learn and grow in that area.
So, how about you share a little info about yourself? Like, why did you get into this profession?
Well, I think now looking back, I was always a mediator. Like when I was in high school or university, whenever things came up, like I lived at York, and whenever we had house issues, I would naturally just bring people together and say, let's talk about this. And so along the way, I thought, I would work at Conflict Mediation Services of Downsview back in 2000. And I really got my feet wet and my footing there, a lot of my training. And then I just fell in love with mediation. I went to Scarborough Conflict Resolution Services, and then I became a chartered mediator. And then I just really have specialized in healthcare, family interpersonal mediation, civil mediation, workplace organizational. I've done a bulk. I would say that my practice encompasses formal mediation as well as training and consulting. And so I've done a lot of that in the city of Toronto and across Canada, and it has just been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure supporting and working alongside community and other folks professionally for them to resolve issues that are real to them.
And you and I, that's where we met, down at Downsview, Conflict Mediation on Eddystone, all those years ago. And then you transitioned and you went east, and I stayed at CMSD.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we had the connection through the community mediation field, and then, we've been, around each other, though maybe not always directly connected. So how do you see what you do of being a benefit to those you work with?
Well, I think conflict is something where it's inevitable, right? Like it comes up for everyone, whether, whatever age you are, whatever cultural groups you're part of and communities you're part of, whether it's in the community or it's in a volunteer role or professionally or in your family. And so I see it as being crucial to being able to work through conflict. And so when people approach me or I come to learn of a conflict that needs some attention, it becomes apparent to me how important it is for people to be able to equip themselves with the tools to build on the strengths they already have. But because that conflict is so personal to them, being able to assist and facilitate resolutions. And there's so many, as you know, as a practitioner, there's so many different tools that we can use. And that's in our everyday life, right? Like we assess things and we're like, oh, we can try this or we can try that. But folks that are living their life, they might not have that at their disposal. And so it's so important for us to be able to work with others that want to learn and grow in that area.
You mentioned that the whole event of having conflict, whether it's nature or nurture. And what do you find that people's perspective is about when they hear the word or they start to experience something as they define conflict?
Well, that's always interesting because sometimes people say to me like, oh, if we're talking about conflict, it's like, oh, well, we'll attend a training or we'll talk about it. And they're not that interested. And as soon as we get into it, it's everyone's interested in talking about their personal experiences with conflict and how they can do better. And so sometimes it's people don't want to talk about it. They want to avoid it. They want to shy away from it. And they're like, oh, that's not me. But when they experience it and they're in the groove or the crux of it, that's when it becomes very apparent that it's important and they want to expeditiously start to resolve that and learn about it. And so I think conflict is one of those things where it's there. We know it's natural. We know it's normal as practitioners. But if you're not used to that, you just kind of shy away. You want to avoid it. Now, like, we don't want to generalize, like everyone deals with conflict differently, but when you ask me what I've seen, I would say 90 to 95% of the time that I've worked with folks, thousands of people across Canada, they are wanting to shy away from it, wanting to avoid it, feeling the impact, describing it as negative, as stressful, that they want to run away from it. And then once we get into it, they start to realize, like, you know what, I have to give this some attention if I'm going to get through this and past this.
So, you know, I see conflict as a struggle. And so what do you see people's struggles with struggle or conflict? Like what are they challenged by with the conflict? Because I know that many of us do promote conflict as a positive opportunity, yet most people tend to see it as a struggle.
Well, absolutely. Like I said, like 90 to 95% of the people that I work with, when we define it, they define it as a struggle, as a disagreement, as a clash, as an argument. And I was, as I reflect on those definitions, they're just one word, right? And so it seems it just rolls off the tip of my tongue. However, what happens is the experience of it is is very complex. And so, you know, the struggle itself escalates the conflict because, one of the struggles is, well, how do I deal with this? This has come up for me, and what am I going to do with this? How am I going to deal with this? Who can I talk to about this? And so even before they can get into this is a to do, I have to resolve this, I want to resolve this, it can become, I don't have the how, I don't know how to do that, I don't know maybe exactly who to turn to right away. And oftentimes I'll say to people in mediation, unless you're like in the field of mediation, like you're a lawyer and you have clients and you're coming to mediation, it's like probably they're one and only formal mediation, right? It's not like people hire mediators consistently to do the same work for themselves, right? Unless they're in that field where, they're in the legal system. And so that alone presents another challenge of comfort. It brings up that anxiousness, the nervousness around what am I to expect in the process? How am I going to navigate through this? I don't have a lot of experience with this, right? So I think all of those things add to the struggle.
How do you see your work within community mediation as something that contributed to how you as a professional do your work?
Can you repeat that for me?
How do you see your work earlier on in community mediation, CMSD, and then transitioning over to Scarborough, Warden Woods? How do you see that, those times, those efforts, that kind of work, which is quite distinct from, let's say, court-based work or, quote, stuff that involves lawyers per se?
Well, I see those times. Like, so that would have been about 5 to 6 years of my practice in mediation. And they were some of the most rewarding times. Community mediation is not necessarily based on legislation. It's not necessarily carved out for you. And so my experience has been that in those times, there was more movement for change. And so my reach would be a little farther, right? And so there was a lot of possibility. Also with community mediation, that's neighbor disputes, landlord-tenant disputes. That's really, it's complementary training because it's covered by other funding. And so people have an opportunity to give it a try, right? And so it also created access for people. And I was very proud of that. I was very proud that people who may have needed these services most could access them because a service like ours existed and they would come to know about it. So we would be able to work with Toronto Community Housing residents. We'd be able to work with low income residents. We'd be able to work with newcomers, like just maybe folks that necessarily wouldn't be able to access community mediation for the fee, like paying the fee to a mediator, or even like the language pieces, because we would be able to offer interpretation services. We would be able to offer different key pieces to make it accessible for people. So I would have to say that those were some of my most rewarding times. And from time to time, I do community mediation. I do things in community, and it always brings me back. It warms my heart and brings me back to those times. And also, like, it gave me an opportunity to work with 60 mediators, like professional mediators who volunteer their time to make these programs accessible year after year.
Yeah, and to clarify too that community mediation is free for service, meaning there's no barrier financially for people, regardless of their income, whether they're this level or that level. One of the questions we wouldn't ask is, what's your income? Right. We don't go there because it's about providing the space and opportunity for people to be able to try to deal with their situation in a supportive manner through our service delivery. And as you mentioned about the dynamic of culture and language, I remember my work too at Downsview CMSD. We had a whack over 40 different languages that were identifiable within the program through the different volunteer mediators that we had. So it was intentional to be inclusive, recognizing diversity and the nature of people and being different. So, putting those barriers, definitions for people to fit into the box is not my construct. It's more about us creating a template that's adaptable to the people and works with them to, to identify what's best for them in terms of the type of process that will work. So how do you, when I say the word change, because you just mentioned it just a couple of minutes ago, what's that mean to you?
Well, change for me is an adaptation of some sort or a modification of some sort. And so when I'm looking at conflict or I'm looking at change, I'm looking at what's different here, what's different from the regular routine. And so I like to keep my definitions quite simple, because once we get working on things, we have to understand what we're working with and what we're comparing and contrasting, right? And so for me, change is anything that is different than what we're used to.
So what's the struggle then? Because I see there's struggle for people with change too. Like, we talk with conflict.
Well, I think that the struggle that I have seen or I've experienced is sometimes we're just used to doing things the way we're used to doing them, or experiencing them the way we're used to experiencing them. And I think like some of the work that I've been doing recently is really talking about when change is the only constant, because I think we can all agree that COVID-19, the first time that many of us are living through a pandemic, has really given us an opportunity to understand that things can change rapidly, and change daily.
Or in the moment, right?
I was just going to say, like, or you'll hear something in the morning and in the afternoon it's different. And so the struggle there is for each of us is, how do we handle change, and what has our pattern been around how we adapt to change and how we experience change, and what are our patterns, what's been helpful and what's not helpful for us, right? And it's so interesting because people say that we are creatures of habit and we're used to our routine. However, we are living in a time where we are experiencing probably more change than ever before, and we will probably continue to, because of the advancements in technology, the access to the global economy, as well as living through a pandemic, to name three big pieces of change that we experience at a worldwide level, right? And then right here at home.
Yeah, and you mentioned that change is a constant for sure. So I really connected with that concept of change in my community mediation days for sure, because the program that I used to manage was simply called Community Program. And then from doing the work with the community, I quickly identified that it really wasn't the whole concept of conflict. It's really the concept of change that people struggled with. It's a continuum. It's a constant, ever-present, ongoing reality. And sometimes things happen that tends to put people in a situation that they don't feel confident with or competent with, and they struggle with it. And it's usually in relation to somebody else. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I think that if I was to add anything to that, I would just say that, and that's where the positivity or the opportunity lies, where the more we are able to connect with that our conflict or what we're experiencing is a change, and that there is an opening for us to grow in that area and to embrace it, that's when we can use our muscles of resiliency and tenacity to really make a difference in what we're experiencing. right? Like, and so it really is a philosophy or mindset. And it falls in line with the growth mindset of what can I learn here? How can I grow? How can I um, move forward with this, with what I have to work with, right? So I think if I was to say anything, I would add that.
I wanted to point out that there was a question in the chat. So question is, do you feel that mediation is only in the legal system?
Absolutely not. I actually talk to people all the time in our trainings to say, whether you use this formally or informally, there's a lot of opportunity because conflict is everywhere. And I don't believe that mediation is only in our legal system. It's used as a tool in our legal system. However, it's used outside a lot. And some of my colleagues, like yourself, we talk about how our careers are maybe 10% formal mediation and then 90% conflict resolution or conflict design or other tools that we can use. So,
Yeah, and for me, with the community base, it's all understanding from my experience that life is about relationships. So I look at the challenges and the struggles that people have with each other as being relationship based or focused, whether it's formal relationships, whether it's informal relationships, people tend to struggle. And keeping that struggle from a relational perspective in the community outside of the system, and I'm referring to the legal system, for me, is the most effective and productive overall. I know there's some situations that are best navigated through the system, though that's the minority from my perspective. I really promote about people having their own power to define and determine, to create their own outcomes. So when we talk about change, usually, so my transition was from the whole thing of conflict to change. And that's why at CMSD, I pushed for and was approved to have a change with the program's name. So it was changed to Community Transformation Program. So the whole basis of transformation and being fluid with that. What do you see people's, when I say the word unexpecteds?
I think before we move to that though, Greg, I wanted to say that congratulations to you for making that change or approving that change, getting that change approved for the name of the program, because language is really important. Like, we listen to ourselves all the time. We spend actually most times listening to ourselves. We probably hear from ourselves more often, right? Like throughout the day. And so, changing the name of a program like that really sets the tone and the path for where we're going. So I want to say congrats for doing that. And then when I hear the word, what was the word?
Unexpected.
I think surprised. I think surprise. That was, I'm surprised by that, or I wasn't expecting that, right? So unexpected. And I think that that's the word that I would use, definitely.
And that's fundamentally why I shifted my perspective of seeing conflict as the struggle to change being the struggle. People have this expectation of what life is supposed to be or what they want it to be in relation to another in the relationships. So that's the pathway of expectations. And then life being what it is, a constant of change, something comes out of left field or a curveball. That to me is what I would call the unexpected. And then at that moment, it becomes the struggle. I wasn't prepared. I wasn't looking for that. I wasn't expecting that. And so then it seems to undermine people's feeling of confidence to be in their moments. And that becomes the struggle with relationship to someone else.
Yeah. And that element of unfulfilled expectation, right? And so it's like we're moving along, or a person's moving along, and they have these expectations. And then I marvel at the concept, because whether I'm working with, I've done a lot of training in the Toronto District School Board as well as here in York Region, and with grade ones all the way up until like high school. And then I've, our work has taken us to a place where I've worked with youth, adults, seniors. And it's interesting that the unfulfilled expectation or that surprised element of that change follows us through. Like younger children will say to me, I'm not happy about this conflict because I expected this. And they're quite articulate. And this is what happened. And for us, it's, oh, unfulfilled expectation. And then you'll go all the way up to all the different age groups. And there's an element of that deeply embedded, right? Where we have these expectations and it's the unfulfillment of that that really throws us off at times, right? And whether you're a practitioner, you're leading yourself, your family, your community, an initiative, we can all get sidetracked with an unfulfilled expectation because at the end of the day, whatever we're experiencing is real to us.
Yeah. So just to clarify too, for me, when I sought the change of the name of the program to transformation, it was, words matter. And it brings meaning to something. It brings something more concrete definition. So when the program was called Community Program, it was kind of empty for me. I needed what I would call an action word. So the word transformation was the purposeful word that I wanted to inject in there. Let's see, there was a comment. It resonated with me what Greg said. It made me think about this called happiness formula, which is happiness, reality, expectations. Do you think like with the expectations and the happiness thing, Pramila, that people get into a place of comfort, maybe not necessarily being connected to their lived moments and maybe somewhat complacent with that?
Well,
and thus, just to continue, and thus, when something comes out of left field, they're not feeling connected to the moment, and then they sort of have to react to it rather than being connected to it as it's happening, and the better sense of responding to it.
right. And I think that to answer your question, like if you are in a happy place or a comfortable place or a place where things are moving along exactly how you like them, and then something uncontrollable happens, yeah, it has the potential to bring you out of that happy place, right? So the formula doesn't exist as you know it. However, what's important to remember is if you look back at your own life to capture those moments of how many times change did really show up, right? And to look back and say, okay, well, how did I navigate through that to get back to my happy place, or how I describe happiness, right? And so I think like we keep moving along, whether it's day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, it's that mindset piece. Like, and I want to say that, I saw a lot of messages about us saying goodbye to 2020, but I do remember myself thinking, well, we know 2020, we know what it brought. And so we're not, just because we're saying goodbye to it doesn't mean that, we're saying hello to something else just yet, or maybe it's, not exactly what we're thinking. Right. And so I think the important thing is to really be patient with ourselves and to really learn and grow from all of these experiences, right? Because we know ourselves best.
So what happens when, you have a relationship with someone else and your expectations and they have different expectations about the same thing? And then there's a clash of the expectations. And so that can impact the relationship, the health of that relationship. What would you suggest people to be mindful of?
Well, on any given day, we can have that at my house, Greg, like playing a game of chess, right? So I have an almost 10-year-old and almost 12-year-olds, and it's so interesting because we teach a lot of these concepts here. Like my husband is a contract negotiator, I am a mediator, and so we teach about using our words and these concepts, and they're really good at feeding that back to us, right? And so I would suggest that as I do in my own personal practice and in my own personal life and my professional life, is looking at the gap, looking at what created that gap, and how do we narrow that gap, right? Because if we want to keep the gap going, we can just keep doing what we're doing. But if we want to narrow that gap and we want to like gain a resolution, we're going to have to assess, how do we narrow that gap? What will be helpful in this situation? What tools will be helpful, right? And so if it's, do I communicate more clearly, or do I get some outside help on this? What is it that I need to do, right? And I think at a macro level, like if you're looking at, resolving conflict in terms of a process, I often talk to people about, like, look at where you are and what works well with the way you resolve conflict, and look at where you want to be and what skills you want, and kind of chart your path forward to get there. And so you're narrowing the learning gap and the practicality of it, right?
I totally appreciate what you're saying. At the same time, I think people struggle, with the unexpected event that happens and they're not feeling equipped. And then we say to them, do it this way. Conceptually, to us, that might make sense. How do you try to get people to understand or comprehend that message, to say, hey, do things differently?
Right. And so I think to give people just one pathway can be difficult, right? And so often what I do is I listen for a lot more information, and I ask more questions, and then I might present a few different options. I think that it doesn't need to be linear, right? Like I explained it as closing the gap, but how you close the gap could be different. Like you can have 3 different processors or different ways to do that, or different people to assist with that, right? And so I like to give people options so they have something to work with. Because maybe one style or process, they would think, oh, I'm not doing that. But maybe they can work with the other. And if, let's say they were to reject all of them, I would say, well, what do you think could work? You've got lots of expertise in what's not working here. What do you think could work? Let's take some time to think about that, right? And so I often am very careful not to just try to present a one size fits all type of resolution, right?
Yeah, and from the community mediation days too, which I'm constantly referring to, because that's just the core to how I identify myself. And that's why I really connected with my own passion in doing this work, is that it's about adaptability. You talked about options. It's, about providing a process that adapts to the people, rather than getting the people to adapt to the process. The whole intention of the process is that it can shape itself according to the needs of the people, the interests of the people. And I think that might connect with something that you just said in terms of finding options, so that one size fits all is not going to work.
Absolutely. And I think that brings me to another key piece of how I do my work is I believe everyone has assets and strengths. And I strongly believe that we are all crafted with unique abilities and strengths and talents. And by meeting people where they're at and listening carefully and learning, then we're able to say, well, these are all the tools and processes that we've learned. And maybe there's something that you want to throw into here. And then that way you're working alongside folks, as opposed to just saying, well, this is what I suggest, go try it out. Right. And that's why many of these processes, they stay resolved, because the communication is even ongoing between the mediator or the community builder and the group of people or people that they're working with, right? Or individuals.
Yeah. And with, conflict, change, how people deal with it, how they don't deal with it. For me, it's not about trying to get some, quote, change of behavior. It's more fundamental. And you and I talked about this in preparation for today. It's somewhat more deeper and internal. It comes from the mindset. Before you answer, or we further that, there's a question from the crowd. And so what would you say is the largest or most common obstacle to conflict resolution?
You know, I want to say that sometimes it might just be our ability to size up and embrace a new way of doing business when resolving conflict. So, what I mean by that is if a person is used to dealing with conflict a certain way, then one of the obstacles might just very well be that they've got to get used to accepting there are other options out there to resolve conflict. Like, we can definitely sit here and talk for a long time about all the barriers that exist in terms of accessibility and all the systemic isms out there. However, what I have often seen when people have come to me is, that's not going to work. We've tried that. No, I don't want to try that. And then we do some work around, okay, what's going to happen if we can't resolve? And then once we get past that, it's like there's a big opening. And it happens on maybe both sides or all of us, everyone that's part of it, because you part of the process is to meet with people individually. And there's that hesitancy or that discouragement of, we've been down this road, I feel disempowered. And so I want to say for that answer is, in my many years of doing this work, is that there's a huge element that lies within us, the people that are experiencing the conflict or the group that I'm working with.
Yeah, and my sense with the question too is that, and also the question I posed to you, something that's more internal and deeper. I'm not seeking to try to get a shift of people's behavior per se, because that could maybe provide for some change for a period of time. And usually from my experience, it's only a short period of time to try to get people to try this instead of doing that. Because fundamentally, it will fall apart after a period of time because people haven't connected with the whole, why do I need to change because they start to second guess themselves after a period of time. So my response is to say the mindset. Our mindset drives our behavior. And if we connect with the idea of why things make sense to us this way relative to that way, and quote, it's better and healthier to behave this way relative to behaving this way, that could be much more effective and meaningful and productive to get people to shift their behavior, starting first with their mindset, their attitude.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times folks have called me back to say, okay, I sat with that. I'm going to make some changes. And then they call me back again to say, okay, those changes assisted and shifted things in a way that I did not expect. Right. And so, of course, Greg, we're talking about these questions and we're answering some of them. And it's easier when you have the full context.
Yeah.
But when I'm doing a bit of a scan of the folks I've worked with, whether they're big group conflicts or individual conflicts, there is a big part of the puzzle is that mindset shift and the understanding of what tools are available to create that change or create that conflict resolution or resolution in their situation.
Yeah, and a comment from the crowd is that there is also a fear of accepting what is oftentimes referred to as a compromise. Seems like when we say the word compromise, it's like you're giving up something.
Right.
And I don't see it as giving up, and I don't use the word compromise. I would frame it another way. It's actually building upon. It's an opportunity, seeing our differences. The traditional way is the notion of impasse, barriers, obstacles, and we tend to go around those rather than into them. Another comment is another obstacle is getting people to really listen to each other. And I think that's all part of this piece, that the comments with the compromise, because people see the compromise as a threat maybe, and that's a barrier again. So how do you really get people to hear each other, to listen, to sort of process that and internalize it, to say, this other person is not a threat to me, though historically they may have had very negative interactions that have brought them into a process where, you know, your efforts are going to be tried to assist them to get to a better place. How do you get them to hear each other, to really appreciate the context, to be patient, to pause?
Well, you know, Greg, we've had many conversations around different processes that are available to us, and when new processes come up, we practitioners, we learn them. And what I have found most useful over the years is that work that I do before bringing parties into the same room or into the same Zoom meeting, to say that, you know, you've come with this conflict, and we definitely know what's not working. We could probably write a little essay on what's not working here. However, what I have seen is that when people really listen and allow others to speak uninterrupted, that's when there can be an opening, right? And so I speak to them about the past successes of many mediators and the percentages of success, because that's not made up. That's the track record, right? And then I speak to them about the process and why they've come. Like, they've come because they were looking for assistance, and that they wanted a neutral third party or a neutral facilitator to navigate through that environment. And that's definitely something I can do. And so by listening and summarizing and reframing and hearing really what their history relationships have been, their outlined concerns, where they want to go with this, it really gets them ready when we sit down together, and you do that for all parties. And then when I sit down with them again, I actually repeat that in the beginning to say, this is the process we're embarking on, and I know that you've heard this before, but I wanted to say it again for all of us to hear that this is a space where, you know, when you can listen to each other uninterrupted, then we can definitely see some transformation. And the other thing I share is the ownership. Like, you have so much ownership over the solution because we're here together, right? And, you know, when you are told how the resolution should go, that can fall apart easily. But when you give your word and invest and say, I can do this, that tends to stick, right? And so I would answer and say that in terms of getting people to listen, it's doing that work up front and then in the moment. And once I get going in a process, I want to make sure that I've done everything that I can. So when I'm done my role in that mediation and I walk away, I want to be able to say I tried every single thing I knew how to try, and we've resolved, or it didn't work out because it always doesn't always, but there wasn't anything else I knew to do.
How much ownership do you take for your efforts in doing what you do in a process?
Well, I think I take full ownership over my efforts in terms of my preparation, in terms of understanding what's happening in the moment, in the mediation, even if I have to pause and take a break to ensure that I've thought it through. I'm not able to take full ownership over the resolution, in the sense that if we don't reach a resolution, I have to let go, right? I don't think I would have made it 21 years if I didn't have that as part of the way I look at it. So, but I've always been the type of person that when it's, when if it's to be, it's up to me. So in terms of like, I've got to put the work in, and I'm saying that this is what I can do in terms of my role. And my role is to navigate through that space and to provide the process, right? And then they've got to come up with the solution, but we're going to work together on it.
I remember my first two cases at CMSD, and we work under a co-mediation model in community stuff. And the first two cases were with the same person, co-mediator as a lead mediator. And they were different situations. I just really struggled with that, and I took it so personally because I felt the situations, as to quote the outcomes, were very unproductive, quite negative overall. And I was taking all that home with me. And I was so affected by it. And I really struggled with how to process that, to separate myself from having ownership of their decision making, to, you know, being able to comprehend that, as you know, we promote that about self-determination. It's the parties having ownership of their decision making. That can be a real struggle, especially for newer people.
Well, my first mediation was a co-mediated mediation with a hearing impaired participant. And the way we were able to facilitate that mediation, and it goes back to access again, was we were on a waiting list. So we weren't going to get someone to come in like a professional to help us. So we actually used a laptop because this person could type, and we typed back and forth, right? But to your point, in those first few months, I remember being quite, I don't want to use the word stress, but I think I really took things on. Like I really felt ownership over outcomes. And I thought it was tough. And then I realized, like, if I'm going to continue in this field, I can't keep doing that because it was too much. And it wasn't mine to own, right? So I definitely can resonate and say that I experienced very similar feelings, Greg.
I think, though, that's part of the struggle with society overall, is that people don't provide the space for another person to self-determine for themselves what they want. And people try to project and impose on another what their point of view, their position is. And that's where it becomes problematic, when the other person quite doesn't get it the same way that we're pushing them to get it. And then they resist and they feel threatened and defensive, and it becomes this bigger situation. So a comment from the audience: I think you need to feel the shift. Anybody who wants change needs to feel the change and the uncomfortable feeling. You can compare it to going to a roller coaster for the first time. There are a lot of shifts and then the smooth ride at the end. But it is checking in with the person and understanding how they feel. And are they willing to move on? Just remember, change is not easy. And further, I think conflict has to be a catalyst to change, an opportunity. You know, it's rewiring people's mindsets to see the barriers, the differences amongst them, and see those instead as opportunities. And hey, the best way to go into that is to actually go into that space, not avoid it or evade it. You know, not be the turtle, as we call it, and hide your head in the shell and then hope it goes away or someone else comes in and fixes it. So going into your vulnerable spaces, you talked earlier about the growth. That for me is the rich area of opportunity, going into your unsafe space somewhat, your vulnerabilities, because you can't predict how things will go. And someone used the word validate in the audience. You know, it's about acknowledgement, the power of acknowledgement, giving that person, the other person, to say, yes, I value you. I may not agree with you. At the same time, I appreciate what you're sharing.
And I think that, you know, whatever people are feeling, it's real to them, right? And so it is important that that comes out at some point, because that's one of the reasons why we might be there, is because people are not feeling that that is being validated or acknowledged. And so we are held up in that space. I think that conflict definitely is and can be a catalyst to change. And again, because we think that it's negative or it's to be avoided, we sometimes don't get to that beautiful place of opportunity quite as quickly, right? Like there are many organizations that, based on a conflict, they have implemented changes that have definitely served them well, right? In all kinds of industries. And so I definitely think that conflict is something to be embraced at times. Like you don't want to be in conflict all the time, but there are times where it has value. It lets you know that something's not right. There are some red flags here. Let's work on this.
And then you intentionally say to yourself, okay, because it's a red flag, I'm going to reframe that from a negative perspective to looking at it as a potential opportunity to venture in because something's quite not working. That's the signal for me. And so it needs to be, from my point of view, an opportunity to go into and get more insight and awareness and try to figure it out. How do you see self-awareness, emotional intelligence, empathy with your work?
Well, it's pretty key to my work. Self-awareness, self-reflection. In fact, it's really important in a lot of different industries in terms of the amount of change that we're experiencing and learning as a society. It's really important for us to actually build time into our schedule, even if it's 5 minutes a day at the end of the day, to reflect and say, hey, what worked well? What didn't work well? Because when you do that, it gives your brain an opportunity to look at the creativity or the innovation that exists within yourself. If we just keep going, then we won't catch those important pieces. And there are sometimes patterns that serve us. And so once we see those patterns and trends, it actually opens up our ability to be innovative and creative through our industry. And so I definitely would encourage people to take some time, maybe 5 minutes at the end of the day, to say, this is what worked well for me. This is what didn't work well for me. What do I want to do differently?
How do you think that COVID-19 has affected our experiences with conflict and change?
Well, I think COVID-19 is a great training ground for us to really build a muscle of resiliency and tenacity. And it has shown us that it's not going away as quickly as we would like it to. And so every day it provides a new opportunity. So let's say we didn't embrace conflict resolution and change enough yesterday. Today is a fresh new day to start over. And so it has given us a lot of opportunities to reflect, a lot of opportunities to do things differently. At times we've slowed down because of stay-at-home orders or the way we do our work, but it has also made us speed up because we're home playing multiple roles. And so I want to share that, going back to, we all have strengths and assets, and asking ourselves, well, what has really prepared me before COVID-19? I didn't even know this was preparing me. Like, what skills prepared me well for this? What am I doing well during this time? What am I not doing well? What can I implement to do better in the next 2 weeks right away? And who are my support people during this time? I think asking ourselves those questions would really, and doing something about that, would really assist us in this time of deep change. And the conflicts that are being created, for some environments, it's escalating things because there's a lot of pressure. And so definitely it comes back to, what can I do within my control to advance in a good way, and to be proud of the way I'm leading myself and my family and my communities throughout this time.
How does all this, because I know you're into leadership stuff, how does this all connect with leadership?
Well, I always say that senior leaders, leaders, whether you are leading yourself or we all have influence. This is important. Leaders, we must know how to solve conflict and solve it quickly. Now, I don't mean take for granted and just do whatever. I mean, learn to listen, ask good questions, and then resolve it and check in again. And definitely leaders have to be strong at adapting to change because others are looking to them for that direction. And I often share that when you don't know the answer, it's okay. I say to folks all the time, it's okay to say, we don't know the answer yet. We're working on it all together. And I've also been sharing with many groups that I'm talking to recently. We now have 14 months of experience dealing with COVID-19. It might look different on different days, but we can draw from that strength. We can draw from the things that we're doing well, and the things that we didn't do so well, we can go back to the drawing board.
Well, to take the lived experiences and look at it from a different point of view rather than as, quote, the negative, shifting it as, well, it's a reality, it's happened. How can I better make sense of this to be productive with it, to make something more meaningful with it, so that it actually contributes to my life and that of others, rather than detract from my life and just be a constant challenge to, I can't do anything. You know, you get stuck in that whole body of negativity.
Absolutely. And it immobilizes folks, and it's quite disempowering.
Yeah. So what do you want people watching or listening to better understand about conflict relative to change? Or I could switch the words, change relative to conflict.
Well, I would want them to definitely look at how conflict and change are impacting them, like start there. And I would definitely encourage them, it's a repeat of my message earlier, to say that, what are your strengths, and what are the things that you want to improve, what's working well, what's not working well, because in that, that's where the answers are going to lie, because you know yourself best, and you want to do what you can with what you have now, right? And it's basically one of the most empowering, taking action around how you want to resolve conflict, how you experience conflict, and how you experience change. And those two pieces are presenting themselves quite often now. And so it's really crucial that we lead ourselves in a way where we are working with conflict and change to advance ourselves in a better way. So I would definitely encourage people to reflect, to build on their self-awareness, and to take action when they see that there is something that they definitely can do differently.
Yeah, there's a comment. Reflection is a great way to end the day. You're actually, quote, in quotes, feeling the day, not just thinking about it. So connecting with your moments as they happen, and, processing those so that they can contribute. And you're contributing to the change, rather than having the change happen to you and then, quote, being the victim of the change and then having to react and not being as prepared to deal with those moments of unexpected change. And so try and use proactive opportunity, being mindful and connected to your moments. What suggestions would you like or propose to people to be aware of to better connect with their moments of change? Any thoughts on that?
Make it a pattern. Like, if you are finding that your moments of change are catching you off guard, track them for a bit. Track like when that's happening throughout the day, how it's happening, and how you're experiencing it. It's a similar model to like when you're experiencing a emotion that is not serving you well. And so you track it so you're aware of when it's happening, so you can catch yourself and then kind of learn from that experience.
It sounds to me that that's about the self-awareness stuff, raising things to the conscious level so we're connected to them as they happen. And then we can actually respond rather than react. And it's more productive and healthier as a situation.
Absolutely. Like, I think that sometimes I think like these things are happening for me and not to me, because as they're happening for me, it really presents an opportunity to learn and grow, and growth and learning and growth and development are crucial, and they're, I appreciate them, and I seek to grow and learn all the time. And so it's another way to do that, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So anybody out there in the crowd you want to ask or say, or you want to send a chat, or you want to have us open your mic and contribute in some way? Any feedback? Comment. I think this was a rich and enriching discussion. So how can people learn from their moments of change? Like you just talked about, we talked about connecting with them and having them contribute to our lives, and the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence, Is there something that is more possibly tangible for people to, because these are concepts and some people, that's okay within our profession or our field. And this is what we help teach people or try to get them to connect, understand in a manner that people can actually comprehend. Is there something that you want to say?
Well, I think that, like, to take it away from the self-awareness and that concept of it, if you want to tangibly learn from your change or about change or how you're experiencing it, then what I do to make it tangible is I just write things down. Like, I write patterns down and I write trends. There's an amazing person, Beth Comcheck. She was responsible for General Electric and NBC large portfolios at given times. She wrote a book called Imagine It Forward, and she really talks about the importance of change and how to embrace it, and that you really have to track the trends and the patterns in your life. And when you slow down enough to see that, they actually reveal to you like where you can make adjustments to really have change work for you. And she links it to innovation and creativity, two of the most important skills right now as we're experiencing change rapidly in our world. And so I definitely would say to people that if you want to make it tangible, track it for a bit. Like, she says something like, when something pops up, she's like, oh, that's interesting. And the second time she's like, oh, it's a pattern. And the third time she says, oh, it's a trend. And so actually I started doing that since August, and it's been quite insightful, everyone. So I would definitely encourage you to, if that is your interest, that you definitely track it for a bit, put pen to paper.
That's what I was going to ask you. How do you track things? Is that like actually recording it down on paper and then having it to refer to at some point to remind you?
I've done it on pen to paper because I'm a pen to paper person, but there's a lot of other folks in my life that says to me, like, there's apps for different things, or you can take notes on your phone, and however it resonates with you. But I do have to say that that activity has really served me even in the business world, like in terms of my business development in these rapidly changing times. So it started off as a growth and development opportunity for me, and then kind of made its way to some strong business development as well.
One question before we go here. What advice would you give to those that are afraid of change / conflict?
Yeah, that's with that one, I would say that because change will continue to happen and conflict is inevitable, that to take baby steps to give yourself permission to embrace it a bit more. So, if you're afraid of it and you're not interested in doing that, to say, okay, tomorrow I'm just going to go with it. Baby steps, one at a time. Simply because it will continue to occur, change and conflict will continue to present itself. So not working with it may not be the best option.
You mean to say to oneself it's not happening, be in denial?
Or avoid it, right? Like we've talked about people that avoid it. So if we just continue on that pattern, and we all do it at different levels. We might,
and with different people too, right?
Yeah, we might say, okay, I'm gonna let that one play out a bit more, right? But I think for people that are afraid of it, to go ahead and give themselves permission or think about it and say, okay, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to experience that differently. I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to try to work with that.
Yeah, and to take on what you just said, to give themselves permission.
Yeah.
The whole thing for me is that people actually have ownership. They may not recognize that. They may not accept that overall. When you talked about strength-based or asset-based, people have these richness resources within, and somehow they have to try to connect with those. And I think when they get better self-aware, the reflection, there's a greater opportunity to connect with the what is, the what isn't, and then say, if I'm not satisfied because of the what isn't, what aren't, or what's not happening, what can I do and what do I need to do to try to make that happen? So if we're struggling with change and conflict, we're afraid, then that, yeah, to simply say, go into that, I know that people will not necessarily connect with that. They have to feel, from my experience too, they have to feel supported to go into their moments of change. Because if we say, from my experience, do this, there's less likelihood that they'll do it because they may have tried it before, especially with this person, they have the problematic relationship, and then it hasn't worked out well, and then again, they become avoiders or evaders. And if people are supported through their journeys of change, through an empathic approach, my experience shows there's a higher probability for them to allow themselves to go through those moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to say thank you very much, Pramila, for coming and putting up with my stuff.
I want to say thank you for having me. It's been a lovely conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the questions and the comments, and I wish everyone really well as they pursue their own journey of change and conflict.
Yeah, I'll just throw it out there. Anybody want to do parting comments, questions? No? I got here late, so hi, Sam. Thanks for coming in, as well as everyone else. Appreciate it. All right, so we're going to wish you a good night, and we'll see you again next week. We'll have another conversation. Go from there. Night. That's a good one. Bye-bye. So, yeah, do your thing, Laura, when you're ready, and we'll all disappear and move on. Life is changing. Have a good night.